Hello and welcome back to some World of Tanks. Today we're going to be taking a first look at an upcoming Tier 8 German light tank for Kpz 70k. This thing is pretty unusual. We actually don't have anything like it in the game currently. But let's have a look at this thing's base statistics, then compare those to some other tanks that are already in the game at Tier 8, and then we'll have a look at this thing's armor model and gun depression in detail using tanks.gg. So, let's get into it. So, here are the base statistics that are currently on the super test. Do bear in mind, it's on the super test. All of these stats are subject to regular changes, but let's have a look at what we've got now. So, it's going to have 240 alpha. That's quite nice, pretty standard for tier 8 lights. Decent penetration, actually, like very decent penetration. 190 standard is kind of above average for tier 8 lights, standard shows, and its gold pen of 260 is very nice. That's almost medium pen. That's better than some tier 8 mediums. That is really nice. It's definitely better than some tier 8 heavies even. So this thing isn't going to be struggling to pen things, that's for sure. It's got nice shell velocity. It's got actually unusual shell velocities, actually, because its heat, which is its premium shell, is quicker than its APCR, which is its standard shell, which is a bit interesting. See how that works. Normally heat is the slower one and APCR is the quicker shell, but oh well. Decent reload time. This thing is going to have mediocre damage per minute. It's not going to be incredible, but it's going to kind of sit between some tanks which we're going to compare it to in a bit, like the WZ132 and the LT432. It's going to kind of sit in that middle ground. Nice aim time, nice dispersion. This thing's going to be quite accurate, actually. It's going to be unusual for a light. As I said, it's kind of unlike anything we've got in the game. Gun depression. So, base gun depression, it has 10 degrees. That's lovely. However, this thing has a switch mode, similar to the STB1 UDES, the tier 10 Japanese and Swedish medium tank respectively, where it can pitch its hull forward and backwards and get extra gun depression directly over the front. Yeah, this thing gets 17 degrees of gun depression when it's doing that. Yeah, that's terrifying. And not only that, it also gets 15 over the back, which is really odd. I think it is definitely going to be the highest gun depression we have in the game. So that's going to be interesting on a light tank as well, of all tanks. But this thing's going to be quite slow for a light. 60 forwards, 20 back. It's not going to be a speed demon. It's not going to be bombing it around the field like lights usually do. It's going to be slow into position, so this thing is going to be a little bit less able to be an aggressive scout. It's going to kind of have to be probably a little bit more methodical and a little bit more careful with the way that it plays. Well, it does have the gun depression to allow it to take some very funky positions and make them work. It has decent amount of hit points, actually. 1150 that's kind of okay. It's higher than average for tier 8 lights. Armor, irrelevant on this tank. It's a light tank, 50, 50. It's going to be pennable by HE, essentially. That's all you need to know. Concealment is really quite good because it's a light, but it's not the highest. It's not going to be comparable to things like the ELC. It's going to be more kind of comparable to tanks like the LT432. So, still very good, but not best in class. And view range of 380 meters is kind of lacking, so you are definitely going to have to run optics on this thing. And obviously you should. It's a light tank. But probably you want to be running food and maybe even have a really good crew to make this thing have max view range. But yeah, let's compare these statistics, which are definitely interesting. Some tanks that are already in the game. Well, Kpz 70k versus WZ132 and the Hawk 30. Two tanks which are already in the game, a Chinese light tank in the tech tree and a premium German light tank. Let's compare. So, DPM-wise, the Kpz is going to be lower than those two. 1800 it's not great, but it is better than some other light tanks that are at tier 8. The WZ and the Hawk do have pretty good DPM for light tanks. Alpha, 240, that's very similar to most lights at tier 8. Dispersion, it is going to have the best dispersion, which is interesting. 0.33 is so much better than the WZ132's 0.38 and the Hawk 30's 0.35. This thing is going to feel very accurate. Same with its aim time. Its aim time is 2 seconds. It's going to feel like you're aimed very quickly, which is always nice. It's better than the WZ's and almost identical to the Hawk 30's. Speed-wise, it's going to be the slowest. The Hawk 30 is very quick at 70. The WZ132 is quicker at 64, but the LKPZ is going to be the slowest at 60. And same in reverse, 20 compared to 23 for the WZ and 24 for the Hawk is what it is. 60 is not slow, but it is slow for lights. That's essentially what you need to know there. HP-wise, pretty similar. It's got more hit points than WZ, same hit points as the Hawk, but better than some other lights that are at tier 8. For example, the Batchat, the French Tech Tree one, I believe that has 1050 off the top of my head. View range-wise, identical to the WZ132, but not at all comparable to the Hawk 30's incredible 410. The Hawk 30 is a scary light at tier 8, effectively. A good player in a Hawk 30 will, using CVS on maps like Prokhorovka, quite scary, actually. That thing is held back by its camo rating. More view range, less camo rating. Whereas the WZ and the LKPZ have a pretty balanced camo rating, view range kind of mix, really. Armour, irrelevant. Pretty much the same as most tier 8 lights, apart from the LT432, which does have decent armour. Penetration-wise, the standard penetration is going to be one of the better ones in class. The Hawk 30 and the WZ are also one of the better ones in class, but the LKPZ is going to be top of standard penetration for lights. And its gold pen is, I believe, going to be the best tier 8 light tank gold pen of 260mm heat, compared to the WZ132's very lacking 225mm APCR, and the Hawk 30's 250mm of heat. 260mm heat is going to be lovely at tier 8, and when you combine that with this thing's really nice gun handling and 17 degrees of gun depression over the front, do bear that in mind, we'll look at the gun depression in more detail in a second. Yeah, this thing's going to be quite scary in terms of its fighting capabilities. It's going to be not incredible at its spotting capabilities. It's almost going to be a kind of pseudo-medium tank, but without any armor. It's going to be interesting, that's for sure. That 17 degrees of gun depression, I'm actually terrified of some of the positions that this thing could, like, use its gun depression just to, like, peek over, put one shot in, fall back. Yeah, that is going to be genuinely terrifying. There are going to be some very broken positions, I'm sure, on maps with extreme terrain that this thing will just find and make work. So let's have a look at this thing's armor model and exactly how that gun depression and those gun depression angles are going to work using tanks.gg. So, yeah, this thing looks interesting. As you can already tell, it's a hull with a dot, almost. It's a hull with a gun. It's, yeah, let's look at it visually, firstly. So as you can see, it looks similar to the Char MLE, which is the tier 9 French funky gun premium tank that is currently in the game, that is available through loot boxes a while back, one of the Christmas loot boxes. This thing has a similar resemblance, especially in terms of the hull and the kind of turret. But let's have a look at this thing, on the live armor. So, the armor, once again, is irrelevant. However, the most important thing we're going to be looking at here is this thing's gun depression. So, as we know, it has 17 degrees of gun depression over the front, which looks like this. That's terrifying. Just look at that for an angle. That is ridiculous. But it doesn't have 17 degrees of gun depression over the entire front. It's a little bit awkward. So, as you can see, it has 17 degrees of gun depression over the direct front and about 10 degrees either side. So almost to the edge of each track. But as it starts going over the tracks, as you can see, the hull starts going back up. And over the side, it only has 10 degrees of gun depression. So we get to here, and it's only got 10 degrees. So it's 17 between the edge of each track. And then as it moves out around, it moves from 17 down to 10. So it's going to be a little bit awkward to make it work, but most positions, 17 degrees of gun depression will be far, far, far too much gun depression. So in most positions, it will be completely fine because it will just still be able to work because it's got 10 degrees over the side. So this thing will be able to do some funky things with kind of like sitting side on to a ridge and then using the gun to kind of peek over. But over the front, using that 17, it might be a little bit awkward to work in some very awkward positions, if that makes sense. But this thing, just 17 degrees of gun depression is ridiculous. But over the rear, this thing, interestingly, also has 15 degrees of gun depression, which is really weird. So you could also do some really funky things, kind of like reversing and then driving away quicker. You could do some really funky things with that. That's going to be interesting. I could, see some maps where you could like reverse up, prop your hull up, put a shot in and then pull back very quickly. Because this thing, obviously, it's only going to probably, if you're intelligent, you should only really be showing this square, which is going to be quite hard to hit. So, yeah. And, especially if you're going to fire heat at this thing will absorb, the gun will absorb heat. So, fire APCR at it, really. That's going to be the kind of moral here, because its turret is basically the width of the gun. Another interesting thing to note, actually, is this thing has ridiculous... This thing looks like an anti-aircraft gun. Like, it has 25 degrees of gun elevation because it can prop itself, it can prop the back of the tank down. That is, being able to sit below the hill on mines and aim up. That is ridiculous. It's an anti-aircraft gun, for God's sake. That is terrifying. And also, you could, prop the front... You could almost aim completely vertical with this thing. That is just terrifying. It's quite funny, really. But this thing is going to be quite interesting as, the stats have kind of allured to, and the gun depression kind of allures to as well. But let's go into the conclusion where I'll give you my final opinion on this tank, and we'll speculate together where we think this tank might pop up first. Well, yeah, I think this tank's going to be pretty good. Its stats are very good in terms of its gun. This thing is not going to be the best scout. This thing is not going to come in and be able to rival the ELC for its scouting capabilities. It just isn't. However, it is going to come in and be able to rival tanks like the LT-432 for its gun, for its kind of pseudo-light, pseudo-medium kind of role, where it can work on most maps because it doesn't just have to rely on spotting to be able to achieve good results, because this thing has a good, snappy gun. It has a kind of interesting 17 degrees of gun depression, which is kind of this thing's gimmick, I guess. It's probably going to be available through loot crates, but we're yet to see which ones. It could be upcoming Christmas loot crates, so Christmas 2025. That's terrifying. But this thing is definitely looking good. It's not going to be an all-out scout. It's going to be this kind of pseudo-light medium kind of role where it can spot, and it will do spotting better than a medium tank for sure. Its view range and its camo will allow it to do that better, simple as. But in a map where it doesn't allow, where spotting isn't possible, this thing will also be able to do pretty good because it has that gun on its side. But I don't know. I feel like 17 degrees of gun depression is a bit too extreme. I feel like this could break certain positions on certain maps where you could just go sit there, have this tiny little square and this gun peeking over. And yeah, you got to remember that the gun is the viewport and the vision port. So I can imagine taking this tank to some ridiculous position with a bush and just being able to use this thing's gun depression to expose that viewport to be able to get vision in places where vision isn't meant to be got. So that's going to be interesting, but we'll see. That is for sure. But I think we'll see this thing in loot crates first. When? God knows. Could be next week. Could be 6 months. It could be never. Because once again, this thing is a super test tank, and super test tanks aren't promised to actually come to the game. So, If you did enjoy today's video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And do let me know down in the comments what you think of this tank. And let me know where you think this tank is going to pop up first. And don't forget to actually sub, because we're going for an ambitious goal of 1,500 subs by June. So become a part of that. And I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!